Hey guys, welcome back to Mondays at the Museum. I'm Carrie and I'm here at the Anna Bemis Palmer Museum in York, Nebraska. So today we're going to be talking about the Red Cross and its history, and I'm going to show you some cool Red Cross items that the museum has in its collection. So why do we choose the Red Cross? Well, we're coming up on an important anniversary. On August 22nd, 1864, the Geneva Convention was adopted by 12 nations that were there in attendance. And if you know anything about the Geneva Convention, it's pretty important in the Red Cross history. Yep, pretty big stuff. Basically, the agreement said that they wanted to care for the sick and the wounded regardless of what side that they were on, and to do so required neutral medical personnel. So how did this come about? Basically, you have to go all the way back to 1859. June 24th, there's this dude named Henri Dunant, who's supposed to be given an audience with Napoleon III, and he's on his way there when he comes across this battlefield. It's a battlefield outside a little town called Solferino in Italy. It was being fought by the French and the Austrian, and it was part of the Second Italian War of Independence. So Henri comes across this battlefield and he's horrified because he sees thousands of wounded and dead soldiers, and there's not enough medical personnel to treat them, and there's no protection for the medical personnel. So while they're attempting to treat the wounded, they're also being targeted themselves. Henri was so horrified by this that he completely blows off Napoleon and focuses on the wounded soldiers. What he does is he works with the locals and sets up in a church and attempts to treat the wounded. He organized first aid with the help of, it said, women and elderly and just anybody with any medical experience whatsoever was there. It was days and days of hell, and it affected him so much that he went home and he wrote a book about it. It's called A Memory of Solferino, and it was published in 1862. It featured two major ideas. So one is that he thought that we should set up relief committees in a time of peace to train volunteers to treat wounded in time of war. And two, that we should draw up an international agreement to recognize and protect those committees. This in itself led to the International Humanitarian Law, abbreviated as IHL, and directly led to the creation of the Red Cross. And they chose the Red Cross as a symbol because Henri was Swiss, and the flag for Switzerland is white, red. But this is basically the reverse. So their flag is red with a white cross, Red Cross, flag is white with a red cross. Actually, when Turkey joined, they changed it because their locals were more familiar with the crescent symbol, so they are the Red Crescent. And as recent as 2005, a new one was added, the Red Crystal, which is interesting. But all three organizations basically work together in the same focus there. So jumping back, 1863. Dunant and four other men founded the International Committee of the Red Cross, abbreviated as ICRC, and then in 1864 there's this International Diplomatic Conference in Geneva where they adopted the Geneva Convention, hence the name. The goal was neutral humanitarian aid and protection for wounded soldiers. So over time, more Geneva Conventions were put into place, and they were on things like shipwrecked sailors or prisoners of war or civilians affected by the war. Henri himself went on to receive the first ever Nobel Peace Prize, which is really big. And if you were wondering when America came into it, that was actually in 1881. Humanitarians Clara Barton and Adolphus Solomons founded the American National Red Cross, which works in congruence with the International Red Cross. So, during World War I, there's millions killed, soldiers and civilian. And at that time, there were 42 national societies of the Red Cross. So if you were a volunteer at that time, there were some different options that you were doing. You were either on the front lines helping the soldiers, or you could have been back in town assembling supplies. Others were even delivering letters to prisoners in their prison cells, which is interesting. World War I ends in 1918. However, it's immediately followed by the Spanish flu epidemic. And so according to the National Archives, World War I, there was an estimated 16 million people killed, but the Spanish flu killed an estimated 50 million people. So medical training at that time was needed more than ever before. Time goes on, things are adapted. In 1949, states revised the existing humanitarian law treaties and adopted a new one that basically says that people who aren't fighting should also be protected and that weapons and methods of war should be limited. There's a lot of things that the Red Cross itself is involved in that aren't actually just treatment of the wounded. You can also see them working with military personnel to explain the rules of war. They bring food to victims of war. They vaccinate livestock. They help families separated by war to communicate. They trace missing people and reunite them. They help population movements. There's a lot of things that they do that help both physically and psychologically, which is really huge. And if you look up online, they're really invested in first aid training. There's a thing that they say that in an emergency, simple actions can save lives. And so they're really big into first aid training and doing so without any discrimination, which is huge. Currently, there are 192 societies, and nearly every independent country in the world has one. Their goal is to help those that suffer. There's 4 main core areas that they work with: disaster response, disaster preparedness, healthcare and first aid in the community, and spreading of humanitarian values and principles. And I think those are really important things. So if you want to learn more about the Red Cross, I would recommend checking out their website, which is redcross.org. You can donate to them. You can find out where the local blood drive is next. You can donate your time to help in disaster relief. The website's really user-friendly. You can give money straight through it. I recommend you check it out. It's pretty cool. So now we're going to show you a couple of the items that the museum has in its collection that is Red Cross based. Let's go for it. Okay, so in our collection we have a lot of uniforms, but these 3 are Red Cross specifically. So these 2 on the ends, this here and this here, were both donated by Jean Halderman, specifically from the Halderman estate. So they were both worn by Mrs. George Halderman. So this one here on the left was worn in 1918 in World War I in Paris. As you can see, it's got the little Red Cross there. She's got the hat, jacket, skirt. And this one was worn by her in 1919 in an Armenian refugee camp near Beirut in 1919. So it's just kind of crazy that we have that in York, Nebraska, but super cool. This middle one was donated by Willis Stover and was worn by his wife, Frances Stover. But she actually wore it at the Fairmont Air Base. It's called a gray ladies uniform. The name obviously comes from the gray of the uniform. Their organization actually originated in the Walter Reed Army Hospital in DC in 1918. So what they did was they were female volunteers and they helped provide recreational services to patients. It became so popular that it kind of spread all over the country to both military and civilian hospitals. Some of the non-medical services that they provided were things like writing and reading letters to patients, getting them involved in crafts to pass the time. They also helped out with hospitality services in blood centers, and they helped care for disaster victims. It says that in World War II, there were almost 500,000 gray ladies helping the injured or disabled, and the program itself continued until the 60s when it was disbanded and altered to more unified volume programs within the Red Cross. So pretty cool stuff there in our collection. That's all for today. Thanks for tuning in. Check out our Facebook and Instagram pages this week. I'm going to be posting some pictures of other cool Red Cross stuff that we have in our collection. We'll see you next week.